I will call the work session to order. Up first on our agenda is Ironwood Drive and Hartwell Drive, the intersection review. Mr. Lemus.
All right, I just need to plug in here.
Yeah, I do to go back and forth. The camera comes in.
All right, Brenta, you go last.
Here you go.
Oh, no, I know.
You got it.
It's gonna tangle
Easy.
around.
There you go. All right, any lead-in on this, or am I ready to fire away?
Just probably a brief lead-in. There's been, I would say, like an ongoing maybe neighborhood discussion. There are a handful of residents in the Copper Hills neighborhood that have expressed some concerns about the intersection on Hartwell Drive and Ironwood, which is at the kind of the entrance of Carver Elementary. I would say also maybe another handful of folks, parents that have students at the elementary, as well as some members of the Planning Commission that are, I think, probably both of the aforementioned groups. And Dan has had a conversation with Ryan Finke, the principal of the elementary school, all kind of related to, there's, as you can imagine, there are two kind of bursts of traffic at pick up and drop off, or drop off and pick up. And so navigating what are probably maybe the best safety techniques for both traffic and pedestrians in that area. And so Dan and Aaron and the Bolton and Mink team have been kind of reviewing that. And tonight we wanted to discuss Dan's findings, and then the next step would be to discuss with the Planning Commission as well as an FYI. So with that, Dan?
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, some of this is review, just to bring it back to where we started. It was in September that we got a call on sightlines.
Mm-hmm.
So if you remember that, we had some complaints about taking a left, or either direction really, getting across Ironwood here from Hartwell. They're worried about the sign at the corner. We did look into that and confirmed that there was something to be concerned about.
Was this parent concern? Where did this? So I wasn't here in September.
It would have.
Was a Planning Commission member?
Okay.
Yeah. So it was an individual call, but we heard it was echoed by a few others. So,
and I'm not sure if you'll get into this, but kind of how that was created is. Are you going to get into that?
Yep.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll show you, and it all goes back to some of the original slides. But
yes.
We left that last presentation with there was also some operational considerations here that we had to take into account. Because one of the things with sight lines as well, if you brought everybody to a stop in an always stop intersection, does that fix the issue? And long term, what's appropriate at this intersection for school crossings and traffic? And so we had two parts to this. So that's what we're going to talk about. Just going to bring it back to what we did with the sight lines, which you saw this fall. So that's already done, but we did have to go back and figure out what we're seeing for operations and really what we should do there for the long haul, because it's probably not going to go away. It's a school entrance, and there's always heightened concern at an elementary school. It's very common where there's this constant concern about pedestrian activity, a young kid crossing a street, and so obviously this is one of those things that we wanted to be pretty thoughtful about. And so going back to the prior sightline concern, Copper Hills subdivision sign, that is the view from the window of the person that made a call and said, I can't see far enough left as traffic picks up on Ironwood. That's not sufficient sight lines. So they were stopped pretty far back, so we did know that, and we took a look at why that might have been, and had to do some of the configuration changes with JCP and such. But the short of it is yes, we concurred that if you're stopping that far back at this intersection, the sight lines were not sufficient.
Can you explain then what those configuration changes were? Because I think that's
sure. But right through here, additional lane was added to handle the capacity coming out of here with the right turn lane, and so that did push the stop sign back a fair amount. And then we also have never had traffic coming from the west. So simply put, I mean, there's now more of a sight line sightline scrutiny that's going to be going on at this location, because as traffic picks up in here, being able to see a good distance is far more significant than it would have been before. So you had two things going on there with Timber Creek and some of the JCP improvements to add capacity there to the signal. So the short of it was is we felt it was fixable, and we also had some concerns about drivers saying this right through was blocking everyone from taking a right for the one driver that wanted to go through the intersection. So I got into the operational concerns here as to whether or not it was set up the way it needed to be for the future, and it was applicable. I agreed. It's better off as a right turn lane and a left through. So that was a fairly easy one that we figured we would take care of at the same time. So we had proposed this in September, if you remember right. So this was, I believe, in September that we reviewed this. We'd move that stop sign up as far as we could go, choke that location down a little, the intersection down a little bit, to keep the driver keep this through movement where he's supposed to go, which is straight across here, and then pick his lane, or pick their lane, and then so that helped with the sight line, bring the car forward, and then of course we flopped the arrows. So what that did is it changed it to look something like this. We now have a dedicated right, which addressed the right turners being able to move freely without getting blocked from one through vehicle. And then the left through is really the appropriate long-term configuration. You can see from the little green line on the left side here, that's the new sight line. That is vastly improved over what it used to be, with the drivers stopping where they should, which is right up about at this crosswalk. So they can see the appropriate distance to the left, which gets us back into what's the proper configuration for the intersection. Is it all-way or two-way stop? Or, when we look at any intersection, we think signal to, and possibly roundabout, and we look at really everything that would be appropriate there in the current and then the long term. So here's the sight line change. Left side is what it used to be from that individual's view. Over to the right is where you should be stopping now. So the sight line issue was taken care of and shouldn't be an issue moving forward as we see it. But where we left it was we did need to figure out what the traffic was doing. If something else was necessary, again, the same comments that we got on the sight line led into the always stop discussion. And so what we had to do is get these configuration changes done, and then talk about what we really saw from an objective traffic review. Do we have a safety concern? Is there something that needs to be done? So what you see here is traffic counts. This is what goes into an intersection review. You actually count the traffic, the movements each direction, and there's certain volumes that you look at and say, yeah, this is going to require a change. For example, of high enough left movement, you get into double lefts. High right turn movement, you get into free rights. So there's different things that we pull out of this, and this is what's used for signal warrant analysis and any other warrant analysis for that matter. So you look for conflicts. I'm not asking you to interpret that. It's just going into the simple realities that this is what we have going on here for the movements. It's a very high right turn. Most folks are going to know that. And it's pretty high left, very high right. And then there's very little traffic going through currently, a small amount coming across. And there's a pretty significant left turn movement in the PM out here. So what we see is this crossing is already protected with the stop signs. So we feel this operates as it would normally need to for any of the pedestrians crossing at this point. This is really the one in question as to whether an always stop would be more appropriate here. But you can see most of the crossing is happening with just the Ironwood traffic. So currently, all the movements are outside of that pattern for pedestrians. The future, as Ironwood picks up though, the question is does something need to happen differently? Because these little thin lines are going to start to become heavier as time goes on. Now, one challenge with school traffic is it's unique to a 15-minute period. It's not the way most intersections are evaluated. They're evaluated 3-hour day, a 4-hour day, you wouldn't drop in a signal system for 15 minutes, and in a vast majority of cases, there's signal warrants actually out there to indicate that that is not the way to invest in traffic control. So you'd have a lot of signals going in if there wasn't a reasonably high threshold for signals to be warranted. So you can see a vast majority of the pedestrian crossings are right here during that school hour, which is expected, but there's a fair amount of pedestrian activity going across the street during the school hours. Go ahead.
Question. How do you count the pedestrians? Like you sit out there and count pedestrians?
Yes.
Oh, okay,
Simple as that.
okay.
And there's a whole separate evaluation to just pedestrians, because when you get into a tremendous amount of pedestrian crossings, you can get into things like pedestrian signals. Like you see at the curling center, there's a fair amount of pedestrian activity that was planned at that location, and that actually got into that signal that's across in front of the curling center. So this is how we took a look at the intersection here for the two and always stop control. So this is just a very simple model. It's when you plug it into the software, it can be calibrated against what we observed out there. But what's most significant about this is growing the traffic volumes out to the 20-year. So this helps to visualize what we're seeing. So take a look. This is a two-way stop control AM. So this is really how it operates now. So just you would use this as your baseline. See what type of problems do we have. The pedestrians are coming across here and right here. And so this is what we see today, and we're taking a look for any major fails and anything that would be requiring or warranting a major change. So I can go on to the next one, always stop control. If we threw in always in the current configuration, how would it work? It's not a problem for the peak hour as far as we're concerned to add in always. It's not warranted. Mind you, it's a 15-minute peak, but we're taking a look at, well, how would it operate? Would there be any backups to Jonathan Carver Parkway, for example? Would there be any other significant operational issues with an always? We're not seeing an operational issue from a traffic perspective. The biggest one is we had to make sure it wasn't going to back up in JCP, because that would be a major problem. But what we would say is the drawback is more of a we'll say it's a traffic engineering review of whether or not it's appropriate in this location. And some of the challenges that we have with always stop here are there's a signal right up ahead, and it's not an overly expected location to stop for 24 hours or 23 and a half hours of the day. It's built as a collector street. Most of this road is going to feel just like a collector that's going to have side street stops, which is what the rest of this is. And a lot of folks are going to have their eyes set on this signal. What we find in a location where you put stop signs right near a signal is this is something that just is gathered from experience in similar situations, is people tend to have their eyes on the yellow ball or the green ball, and there's often a lot of non-compliance and, quite frankly, running the stop sign, which leads to even worse issues if you have a driver that's not compliant with the stop sign and somebody who's expecting them to stop. So we actually run into some issues in which in this location we would advise away from a stop sign unless it's highly warranted. And so it's most challenging when you have the unexpected happening. And in that case, it's unexpected for a pedestrian to have a driver not stop if there's a stop sign. And in many cases, when they've got their eyes on the signal in front of them that's so close, that can be a bit of an issue. And they've got their eyes up.
How far away is that?
Well, this is going to be 250, 300. It's probably about 500 feet. I'd have to measure it for you, but it's in that. I think it's in that general magnitude, maybe 500 to 1,000.
Okay.
So let's go to the future, and this was more telling for us here. So we're going to go in the future. This is two-way stop control. So the big question is, does it fail once we grow the traffic on Ironwood which is what everyone's gonna ask about, is Timber Creek's developing. So we get more traffic coming on Ironwood. Do we have a problem? Backs up a bit more into the school. We're not seeing any issues on Hartwell, but really that's not the worst place for it to be backing up. It's just a little bit more of a delay leaving the school. But operationally at the intersection, it functions quite well, which is more of that indication that there's nothing from a traffic perspective that drives the need for change here. This is almost the counter to that is we do have a bit of a fail up if we do go always stop in the future. This movement starts to back up to the point where we consider that to be a queuing failure when it gets up into this type of a range on an always stop. And so we actually end up braking on always stop control to the degree that we'd have to say, well, do we go back to a two-way stop? And then is there any need for other type of traffic control when we get into this type of situation? So this is helpful in that it shows very clearly as it grows, your fail would happen on Ironwood at some point in time.
And it looks like, Dan, if I'm reading into that, that doesn't solve for the backup into the school property, right?
It does not. That is, no, it doesn't.
Are we going to have another way to get on 212 west of this?
Monroe.
Okay.
Or no,
There's another-
212.
Yeah.
Not till 43. There's a crossing plan for halfway through between 11 and 43. But 43 and 11 are really the only ways that you'll be able to get on 212. So that's planned by MnDOT. So.
Okay. Dan, you were saying that they had, with the stop signs here, that they're gonna have their eye on the stoplight. We already have stop signs there, right? So what?
Two-way
No,
stop.
You're talking about the eastbound.
I'm
coming on Ironwood.
I'm talking about the driver coming down Ironwood, looking at the
Right.
lights on JC.
So do we have a crosswalk from what you were looking at right there already?
Yeah.
There's no stop sign.
Okay.
So in that particular case, it puts the impetus more on the pedestrian to be aware and be cautious crossing that location than it would in a stop sign where your average pedestrian is going to say, I'm going to go because they're supposed to stop. So, accidents are just that, they're accidents. People aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing or what to happen, and that's what we have to look at is what's most likely to occur. So yeah, that's what we've observed in some other locations and we've seen in certain studies. So the outcome of this, to your question, Jonathan, is we didn't push the model to redirect driver behavior right now. That your average driver would be taking a left here to go to the signal. If this gets bad enough, what's going to happen, because the connections around here to the right are going to be through. Yeah. People are going to get tired of waiting, and they're going to slip into the right turn lane. They're going to take a right, and they're going to come up and around. They're going to go up to Monroe and take a left on JCP there. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to be quicker than sitting there waiting and then taking a left. And so it could be anyway. So that's not something we put into the model unless we really got into probably a deeper level of modeling than we did here. So, but that's probably what would happen in the future. So we will get to the next steps here, and I'll just open up for questions. So we've kind of done what we said we were going to do, which is we're going to evaluate the sight lines and the operations and come up with our thoughts on what is warranted and justified here. What we're finding is the school traffic pedestrian crossing issue, crossing guards, that's just imperative. This is 15 minutes a day where there's lots of young kids crossing. There's no replacement for people there, activity, commotion, saying stop, red flags, kids are crossing. They're not well suited to be running across on their own, whether it's stop signs or a two-way stop. There should be crossing guards there, and we met with the school and indicated as such.
Do they already have those?
They do.
Okay.
He doesn't like it because it's hard to staff.
Yeah.
But we basically felt that you have to get into almost a signalized situation before you can even replace that, and even a signal has some risk because there's right turners, there's a lot of activity for
Short people too, yeah.
anybody young.
Yeah.
Crossing at that location is probably not well equipped to be doing it on their own. So that was number one, is we feel that that's really essential. You know, the first question is do we have crossing guards at this crossing during the major activities? There will be a growing, probably a little speculative, but I'm just assuming we're going to have more people going to that park in time. It's going to drive a few more crossings there. So that's getting into our last recommendation or thought on this. Traffic operations would suggest maintaining the two-way stop condition. The last thing we ever want to do is go two-way to four-way and then back to two-way in the future. So if it fails as a four-way, and we've got a challenge to even justify a four-way from a traffic perspective, it clearly isn't warranted to bring Ironwood to a stop, not from a traffic, which is why you typically put in a stop sign. It's balanced traffic all directions. In this particular case, Ironwood's a collector, and it is really designed as a through movement. And so suggest maintaining the two-way stop condition with the crossing guards during school traffic, and then we're not seeing the warrants to change it up. It's not even close on signals, a signal warrant, in which it's about a $500,000 investment if somebody were to say, let's just put in a signal. And a roundabout's probably $750,000 investment, which we can always say that they're safer, but you put in a roundabout everywhere, for the same rationale. So we do have to have a threshold of reasonableness. And then future traffic growth and growing off-peak pedestrian activity. The park was a concern that there are going to be folks coming across Ironwood at this location to go to the park, and so we would suggest planning for something that is replicates what we're talking about with the crossing guards, which is elevates the driver's view of or awareness of a pedestrian crossing there. It's the same things that you've seen in any number of locations. It's just a little flashing beacon. You push the button, the lights go off, and they're highly effective at warning drivers that there's somebody crossing, bringing them to attention, and getting them to stop and yield to the pedestrian crossing. They're not super expensive either. It's not a multi-$100,000 investment. So it's something I think that could be planned for, and I think there's various funding opportunities that can be out there for a school crossing that we suggest pursuing in the coming year or two. We're not considering it to be an urgent issue. There's very, very little traffic on Ironwood right now. That being said, proactively speaking, I would say that's probably worth planning for in the future at that location. So that's our findings, and next steps really come down to any feedback I get from this group. So,
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Wow.
Questions?
So that's the first time I've seen that kind of study and simulation. So it might sound silly, but that was really interesting.
Yeah, that was really cool.
oh,
Do we do this regularly when we're making these kind of changes? Is this normal practice that we would get to see a traffic impact study like that?
not everybody does it, but I like to. Because it's not hard for us to cut a video clip of our software. Our software does it for every study that we do. It's in there, but we don't often cut it into a video. I'm preferential to doing it because
Sure.
it's helpful. I mean, we've gotten into some pretty complicated situations to explain by numbers, and this just helps lay it
Well,
out.
that's really helpful for me. And if anybody were to ask me about this intersection, I could absolutely relate that to somebody else. So I found it really interesting.
Oh, well, that's
and
good.
a great way visually for me to understand.
It is visually impactful, it really is.
Yeah. This is the first time I think
Yeah.
we've seen
I don't
anything
remember
like this.
seeing
It
that.
was for-
No,
it was
I don't think we've
fascinating.
evaluated it or.
Yeah, the
just
data
like
and the
that,
numbers and that kind of thing. So like really cool to have that tangible. Appreciate being able to see that.
Yeah, you should see some of my complex models that I've shown you. That was a pretty simple one.
Is it really nerdy? Is it really nerdy
We
stuff?
look forward to it.
It's pretty wild. You can pretty much see the cars driving through the roundabouts and everything. But yeah, no, this is helpful for.
So
us
Dan, to
too.
summarize, I hear you saying we've taken care of the sightline issue for the northbound traffic that's turning east. We're good there.
Yeah,
And we're good at
it
it.
meets minimums. Yeah.
We're good at a two-way stop right now. The only issue is those pedestrians who are crossing north-south on
Yes.
Ironwood.
Yeah. Yes, I would say.
Okay.
That's really where we're at. The median helps because there's a refuge there that didn't exist before. It's not wide enough for us to say technically it is a refuge. We want 6 feet for you to stop in the middle and let cars go the other way.
Uh-huh.
But it's enough that someone could get out of the way.
And the solution for that someday is an RRFB.
Yeah, I think during those off-peak hours that are not part of the school crossing, yeah, that's something that I think would help a lot of folks get across with
Okay.
a little bit more comfort.
So I hear you saying that's never going to be a solution for the school crossing,
The
for the
RFB,
school hours.
I would say the crossing guards should be out there helping the kids understand how to use the RFB and saying, let's go in a pool and platoon. The RFB would help to probably pool kids across, but they still need somebody there, not for that age.
Just for height too, right?
Well, yeah, it's their visibility is
Yeah.
small, they're playing, they're pushing snowball. To me, it's just they're young kids crossing a street. There should be somebody that's watching it,
Okay.
and I'm never going to vary from that because you can't replace any electronics with somebody looking.
Okay.
And so, but the RFB would help because then they can just push it and use it.
Right.
So you said there might be, because it's by a school, that there might be some funding available to have that? Or is that going to have to be all city funded?
There's funding. There's a lot of funding out there for things like this. It's just we've got to put our sights on it, find out what program timing and cycle, and so it doesn't have to be all city funding if we find an opportunity that fits. But I'd say we start with all city, and then we try and fill the gap with something outside.
Okay. So I'm thinking about Waconia. So if you're coming north out of Kelowna on 284, that's the highway, it's 55 that goes into
Yep.
Waconia. And then you've got a set of roundabouts there, and those are collector streets that are coming in on the sides.
284. You're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah, because then you've got the one from Target, I don't remember what the road is called, the one
Highway
that's.
10.
Sure, sounds great.
I designed it.
Oh, excellent, okay.
Do you want to
So you know what I'm talking about, so you know what I'm talking about. So, you know, because we were talking about this being, because it's collector, and we still want it to function as a collector road, and that how the stop signs are very obviously starting to stop things up. Is this something where we might want to look at a roundabout at some point to keep traffic moving, especially as we have more traffic coming from the west?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about that. With the roundabouts, they have different warrants. Because I do like it at this location. I do like the idea of it. It's close to the signal, but I like the idea of it at this location. They make it a little easier to put them in because we just use an always stop warrant. And then, we've always got the safety benefits. So I would say if you get into 20-year volumes on Ironwood, you may be able to get into the justification category. So let's change the dynamics of this whole area and say make this a low-speed environment approaching the school entrance. It's hard for me to say that it's worth it now at this point. It's an expensive investment for really your 15 minutes.
Being that it's by a school, is there any way to find funding for something for that?
With our volumes, it would be very difficult because when you get into transportation funding, it tends to be, do you have a problem? Can you prove you have a problem?
So someone has to get run over first.
Well, you honestly, when you look at HSIP funding, you're looking at what is your history on accidents that were severe. And I'm not saying I wrote the rules, but that used to be the program parameters is how many injury accidents did you have. They now have a proactive category, but this is still, you've got to have a type of a circumstance that's likely to cause serious injury. And just by looking through the scoring and such, it'd be a tough one to fund. That being said, I'll never say never, because, you know, we've obviously found some funding for various things that were a challenge, but the volumes are very low here, which makes it hard.
For now, yeah.
Yes, for
Yeah.
now, yeah.
Okay. Just
I'm not
they keep
discounting
traffic-
it for a
they
long
keep
time.
traffic moving so quickly, especially with people coming out of the school, so.
Yeah,
I don't know, we should
it,
take that out of our minds that at some point, far beyond my years with the city, maybe.
it's possible over the time when Ironwood gets to be very busy, and we'll see how it works with the school and the events and or the fields and the events and such like that. That we have some issues where maybe a very small condensed roundabout in time
Okay.
could be something that'd be kicked around. I'm probably, I could probably throw a distant review out there in 5 to 10 years and maybe reevaluate is how I could leave that as a final step.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, comments? No, sounds good, all right. Thank you for explaining it. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Yep, no problem.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 3, large event permitting discussion. Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So, over the course of the last, it's been a handful of months, staff has been working on a draft large event ordinance. And the intent here is to get, I think to give staff a heads up when these sorts of events are coming, and also to let them work with the applicants on figuring out what sort of special services might be needed. Road closures, extra law enforcement, potential fire related services, signage, all different kinds of things that go into these events that the city is involved to an extent on, and we want to find a way to not only cooperate with these entities to the best extent possible to plan for the events, but also to ensure that it's not necessarily the public paying for their particular event, that we're getting reimbursed for it. And so we put together this draft. It is a pretty straightforward, at least at this point, it's a pretty straightforward process for the permit review. As of right now, the way we define large events are either you're going to require a road closure. That's sort of the one triggering event that will always get you there. Or if it's at least 150 guests that are anticipated to be there. And those thresholds, I think those are pretty typical if you look at other cities throughout the metro in terms of what number of persons you're looking at. I think some cities go up to 200. Others are as small as 50 or 100, but we started at 150. And so a permit application would be submitted at least 45 days in advance to staff. They would describe the event and discuss what sorts of services they might need. Staff would review it. It would be distributed to all the department heads to determine whether their specific department would maybe need to be involved or provide services, etc. And then it would be an administrative review process that staff would handle. And as long as they can meet certain conditions and they follow the ordinance, hopefully the event would be able to operate not only to meet the needs of the event coordinators, but also to meet the needs of city staff in terms of timing and all of those important things. And so really we're just at the point where we wanted to put this draft in front of the council and have you weigh in on your thoughts, whether you have questions, concerns, or ideas that might make it better, or something that you're looking for or not looking for. We can certainly tweak it, so nothing is set in stone at this point in time. The other thing that's worth pointing out is there's a list of exceptions that we have in this draft. That's in kind of on the bottom of page 1, section 10342B. There are certain things that we didn't think it made sense to have them be regulated through this ordinance. Funeral processions, city events, things that the city is involved in planning, like the fire department annual open house or steamboat days or night to night, sports activities that happen all the time and we're already sort of programmed for those locations where they're held. And then other things that we have to exempt out for First Amendment concerns, which is kind of the use of traditional public forums to get your voice out, rallies and things like that. As long as there's no road closures required, those potentially would have to be exempt it out. So that's why we have that list of exemptions at this point. So I think, again, we're just looking for some feedback and thoughts, and we can either make changes if you want us to and bring it back to another work session, or if we're closer to a final product than we may think we are, or that you might want to say we are, we can always bring it back after making a few minor tweaks for adoption. So happy to hear your thoughts,
All right.
questions. And I don't know if Brent has anything to add. He's been very involved, and I think you've got some ideas about events that you kind of want to use as examples that
Sure.
why we're doing this.
So just kind of a background, maybe especially for Eric, this was identified in the council's strategic plan. So it was for a conversation, so you always have the opportunity to say, this isn't really what we're looking for, we don't see a problem, we just want to leave things as they are. I would say like a kind of a recent example, one that Vicky's working on is we have this would be the second year, we have I forget what the name of the group is, but it's not your mean, as they are wanting to do a fun run or a motorcycle kind of rally, and they want to close down Broadway. In the past, we've been a little bit hands-off on it because the county has been issuing the permit, but we still have some, I would say, staff time into providing barricades, picking them up, dropping them off, making sure there's enough garbages in the downtown, etc. And so just, we'd use the private infrastructure kind of policy as an example of like how, what are the council's expectations for that. And, part of this is, would say looking forward. In the past, I think, Mayor Johnson and I worked on this. There was somebody that was holding Jeep shows at Riverside Park.
Yeah, I was staff back then. Or no, yeah, I was staff back then, I think.
But, they haven't gone on, but in the past they wanted to be on Broadway, but then they moved to Riverside Park, and it was just kind of like, we didn't know what our role was, and were they gonna serve alcohol or not, and should we have
And
the
we were gonna
sheriff's
charge
office
for the
there?
park, and then we didn't, and then.
And so it's a matter of like, okay, can we get all these ideas into kind of a council expectations? Can we have a process that ensures, the city clerk's office, police, fire, public services is involved. At one point, this was maybe 10 years ago, the Lions were interested in doing a circus, but there was some confusion and consternation related to, they were planning to park on Jonathan Carver Parkway to then access the circus. And so just trying to kind of figure out, is there a space to kind of tighten that up and have a defined process and hear what the council's expectations are for cost reimbursement, for time and resources. Because I think the concern that we had talked about at the time, that as the city grows, more of these events are likely to happen. And we don't want to find ourselves in a position where we are maybe providing garbage service and barricades for one event for the Boy Scouts, but not for the Girl Scouts, etc. So that's kind of the beginning of the conversation, and we're at, I would say, the point where we can say, well, this is a framework. Do you like it? Do you want more? Do you want less? Is it just right, etc.?
And this was something that I brought to strategic planning, and not only to have, uniformity and consistency, but also to perhaps be more welcoming and invite more of these kinds of things, and be like, again, like what Brent said with the infrastructure policy, be like, okay, you want it, here's, here you go, here are the rules.
So
Go ahead.
that's logical. Question I had for Brent earlier, in exceptions, I was thinking about what brings a group of 150 people. So a peaceful protest, that's transitory in nature, but by not explicitly putting it in exceptions, I would hate for somebody to think that we're trying to regulate that and saying you've got to apply to do that. So are we protecting ourselves? Do we have any worry about a peaceful protest occurring in Carver without listing it under a transitory exception?
No, because I don't think it would be an exception. I mean, if there's 250 peaceful protesters, they may need just the same sorts of services that any other event might need, and so we would treat them as if, I mean, these are public health, safety, welfare things that we're looking at, and they would have to plan it through this ordinance.
Those things are typically not planned
Well,
in that, in
true,
advance.
true, and we could potentially put a stop to them if they got too big and they were disrupting traffic, or roads were closing, or, was causing issues with public services. I mean, that
And the
is
goal
an
is
issue.
not to encourage, come to Carver to have your peaceful protests, but I also don't want to have language that looks like we're disallowing that without some extra regulation that might.
I think if you look at the top of page 2 under, I think it's subset 6, there is a carve out, and Dave and I and the team talked about this. There is an exception for the communication by the public. It talks about free exercise of protected activities,
Okay,
as long as it doesn't interfere with traffic in a public street. So if,
but when it becomes unpeaceful, it's a problem, obviously.
but if a group wanted to, protest, large event permits, they could do so on the sidewalk. But if they, all of a sudden, the group was like blocking off Broadway, this gives us a way to try to manage that in a more coordinated way.
As long as the language here doesn't have the optics of us trying to regulate it or prevent it. That's all I was thinking about.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. And I don't think it does, and it's relatively similar to what else is out there. I mean, this is, we certainly don't want to make this look as if we're targeting those types of events and saying, don't come exercise your freedom of speech and your rights to protest in Carver. But at the same time, if they cross that line and start,
Sure.
clogging up your streets and turning into too big of an event where we can't even function, then it's a pretty simple, you meet the definition of large event under the ordinance, and you need to have a permit to operate. And if, and I guess some of those are not only transitory, but they can kind of happen on very short notice, right? They're not gonna have 45 days potentially to plan such an event. But to the extent that they can do that, I mean, there are a lot of events like that are planned well in advance, rallies and things like that, where you're exercising free speech and trying to make a point. And I think a lot of those events will potentially fall under the permitting requirements, and we'll see them over the course of time, as the city grows. But you're right, when those events happen on a whim or with very short notice, we have to just keep an eye on them and make sure they don't get to the point where we would want to shut them down. But, I mean, that's like this is a very, probably a bad example for a city like Carver, but when all the protesters after George Floyd were out on Highway 94, that was creating extremely bad public safety issues, and they had to go out and they arrested people, they cited many people, and a different scenario, obviously, than we'll probably see here. But that would be, one thing where you'd want to keep your eyes open as a city for safety issues, right? If the event gets too big.
Again, as long as you think that we have not done anything that someone would say, well, this is a restriction of my freedom by this, what we're implementing here, and it doesn't appear there is. That was the question.
Sure. I think it's a good one.
Thanks for bringing that up. That wasn't something that was on my radar when I thought about this, but I can certainly see how that could have those optics. So, let's see. I have some feedback. I imagine we all do. Should we just start going through section by section?
It wasn't that much.
So, well, do you have overall, like mine
I
are
just have
notes
some-
that are in the sections,
Sure.
so.
However you want to do it, and obviously as someone who does and participates and manages a lot of events, I just have a few things, but I think overall it's good.
Yeah, I think it's great. I just had a few things. So, maybe I will start. In the very first paragraph, and this is not indicative that I have comments on every single paragraph, because I actually was going through here and I was thinking of things and I jot down notes, and as I read through it was like, oh, it's in there. Okay, great. So, really good job of anticipating my questions. But in the section 10.340, intended purposes, it says that part of the reason behind this policy is to create events, I'm looking at the third line, so that such events do not create disturbances, become nuisances, and then disrupt traffic. I feel like the reason why we have this policy is because we're anticipating that these events will disrupt traffic for sure. And I just feel like we'll always have somebody who will be like, yeah, Steamboat Days creates disturbances and it's become a nuisance. Not that this policy covers Steamboat Days, but I feel like that's so up to each individual perception that I think that should be taken out, because I think folks will argue that large events do create disturbances and become nuisances for.
So the word nuisance, become nuisances, you don't
I
like
think it's
that
disrupting
phrase?
traffic when you.
For me, I've highlighted create disturbances, nuisances, and disrupt traffic. Because I think that that's gonna happen regardless of how tightly we have this
Well,
policy.
And sure, I mean, and I think, of course, nuisance is in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
What I think is a nuisance, you don't think, or you don't think, and I think that's just sort of inherent with public nuisances. We have our language in the city code about what is a nuisance, and it's anything that, you know, affects the moral comfort, safety of somebody, and well, everybody is different. So there's always gonna be that gray area. This is just really, this paragraph is meant to sort of say, here's why we're regulating this stuff, because the city has police powers and we can regulate events like this and permit them and require a process for them. And the point is, you know, we get to decide what is going to become a nuisance and what's not going to be. So for example, when there are events that wanna run until 3 in the morning and they wanna, you know, leave their DJ or their live music or whatever they have outside and do it until 3, well, we would say, no, you can't do that, that's too late, you have residential zones nearby, and we want you to close down at a, you know, reasonable hour.
Okay.
So I think if we take that out, it sort of cuts down on our purpose for creating the ordinance itself. And I like keeping it in there, and I'm happy to talk through it more, but I think we want to, I mean, that's really just the purpose of the ordinance and why we're doing it. And as the council, it's sort of your policy statement. We're creating this framework, and here's why. And when we're talking about disrupting traffic, the reason we want to do it this way is because we'd rather, if we're going to close a road down, know about it a few weeks in advance so we can create, you know, different routes for people and put signage up and say, you know, traffic this way or. So I'm not. I guess maybe I'm having a hard time understanding why you don't like that language, and if there's something that.
Because it can be subjective.
I'm just envisioning it in the eyes of a resident who wants to see the policy and has an issue with the event and is saying, they have this policy, in my mind, it's still creating disturbances, it's still becoming a nuisance, and it's still disrupting traffic. The way you explained it makes sense to me, so this doesn't have to be the hill that I die on, but I just think it's very subjective.
I think I know where you're heading. I think all those things are true. I think where the exceptions come in, like you mentioned Steamboat Days, the city is part of the planning for the event, and so we have influence in how the event is being put on. Or these other events, if we don't have a permit process, we have no, we don't have a seat at the table with the planning. So I would say to someone who thinks Steamboat Days is a nuisance, I wouldn't argue with that with them. I would just say we're arm in arm with them in planning the event, planning public safety, planning traffic routes, etc. Where the motorcycle run, we are not, and so this gives us a vehicle, no pun intended, to be there and make sure that they've done all that coordination. Does that get at what you're saying?
Yeah, that makes both of your, it's still subjective, but it's not something that's gonna keep me up at night, so I appreciate that. The other question I had is timing for filing. Is 45 days enough notice, especially, you talked about in here, the process if it was, a permit was denied, but is 45 days enough?
So Courtney, I'm gonna just, with mine, I actually had, is it too much? Because we
Oh,
had
really?
Yeah, because although we, like, and I can speak for myself too, is, you know, with steamboat days and lines, like, I'm used to planning ahead, right? Like, I'm used to saying, okay, it's gonna be 6 months from now, let's get it taken care of. The motorcycle group who's out here might not think, oh, whoops, you know, like, it's 42 days now, it's, you know, it's 41 days. 30 days is a month, we have 2 council meetings within that time to approve, or if there's a, you know, if there's a denial. So for me, thinking outside of somebody, and you've also worked in some of these committees too, and you know that we think ahead because it's our nature and we've done it so many times. To the average person, is 45 days even excessive? Do we even need 45 days rather than 30? Especially because there's 2 council meetings within a month they can be approved at, or come to us if they have a denial.
We did go back and forth as staff about that. First we were at 60 and then we're like, that's way too far out, and then we're at 30, and then we tried to thread that needle. But it is tough because not only do we have to have them do it early enough where they know what they want to do, we also have a number of department heads that need to look at it and opine about what they might want, or services that make sense. And who knows, someone might be on vacation and then you're a week out before you even get the person an initial response. So I don't know if 45 days is the sweet spot, but we're open to whatever.
And I would just add my concern, again, we don't know, we haven't been through a lot of these, but I know when we were talking about that, one of the things that I was thinking about is, it talks about, you know, compiling all of the costs and determining not only what they put on their application, but then what do we need to do to make that happen, determining, you know, what the costs are. And then I think later on it says 20 days prior, they need to put this deposit down, so to speak. So I don't know if 45 days, I would like to see at least 45 days just from a processing standpoint. But I think once we would do a couple, we'll know whether or not that's not enough or if it's too much.
Right.
I would rather err on the side of us having enough time rather than putting us in a situation where we don't have enough time to process what do we need to do for this event, what do we need to communicate to them, and then if they have some issues or they're missing information, that gives them time to get that to us. But again, not having gone through this process.
Right. But then we also, I want to make sure, as Courtney even said before, we want to make this, or maybe it was you, Brent, sorry. We want to make this inviting, right? We don't want to feel like we're pushing people off and like making it so tough on them that it doesn't work out either. So I want to take that into consideration, because even when we were talking about fees for the room downstairs, we got really big on it and then we realized it wasn't working for us. So not that things can't be changed, but I'd hate to go from being overly, not that 15 days is overly, but I'm just saying overly restrictive, then to try and backtrack that, well, we already have it. Well, why would we put an event on there? It's hard to get through. It's impossible to do.
Yeah.
So I just want to keep that in mind. Not that, like I said, 15 days is going to be the end all be all of everyone's, but I do have another question. When you said 20 days for the...
Yeah, it says...
That's for when we will require them to make a deposit if
Yep.
they're gonna have a bunch of services to reimburse the state for. We're gonna require some upfront money to have their buy-in. And I think it's that and insurance as well that they have to provide at least 20 days before the event.
What does 20 days mean though? Like, does that mean calendar? I mean, we want to talk business days, calendar days?
It's calendar days, which we can clarify, but that's typically the way
Okay,
we look
I think
at
we
it.
should just make sure that whatever word that, whether we want to go by calendar days or business days, however that is in there.
Yeah, and the one thing to keep in mind too when we're thinking about the time period, all these events are, because of the definition of a large event, they're either going to be asking us to close a city street, or there's more than 150 people there and it's going to be either in whole or in part upon publicly owned property or right of way. So I mean, they're going to need the city's cooperation, and they should know very early on in the planning process that they're going to have to reach out to the city. So I don't know, again, if 45 days is the sweet spot. You're going to have a better pulse on that, you know, than I am, Christy, because of your experience planning events. But there's events that will happen in the city, if they happen all the time, that we aren't even going to know because they're not going to fall under the definition of something that requires public streets or roads or right of way or something to be used and closed.
I wouldn't wanna go any more than 45 days.
I'm hearing you say that, I mean, and we can always, if we hear Vicky saying, oh my God, this isn't working, we can certainly, so, okay.
But how many of these are we gonna get into? I mean, we have to
Both
figure
of
it
them.
out.
Yeah.
Both of them, yeah.
So-
Steve days doesn't count.
But
so
that's-
part of the calendar.
But that's
Yeah.
what we need to figure out, right? If we-
Right, but that's what I'm saying is, are we like 45 or 30 days, just because it's not gonna be, we're not gonna get one of these every week that's coming in.
I hear Vicky saying that she would prefer to have 45 days, so I wanna keep it at that.
It
as a
sounds
minimum
like
to start
30
with.
could be a compressed timeline if something goes, there's miscommunication, so I would agree that
Yeah.
45.
45 works for me.
Okay.
What happens if you come in at 42 days? Do we just automatically say no? Or do we say, we'll see? What are we doing with that?
I would say we gotta hold the 45 because if, if you okay it at 42 and then someone comes in with a maybe an even
37.
larger permit at 41, I mean, where does it stop? I would say there's degrees of reasonableness, but I wouldn't wanna start off saying, we're gonna, if they're within 5 days of the 45, we'll cut them a break, because then I think we should start off and say, well, let's make it 40 then. So if we, and 45 is a halfway point if you think it should be 40, or if you think it should be 42, if you think it should be 37.
37 and a half, I
29
know.
and a half.
I would-
45 is fine
I would say
with me, that'll work.
90% of the instances, Vicky and how she processes things is gonna be way less than 45 days. It's just that one where someone comes in totally not prepared and, they haven't thought about any of the things that you have in here. And so then we need as much time as we can possibly get to help them through that.
And what are you seeing, Brent, from, for example, like the bike rally? How far in advance are they reaching out to the city? I mean, are they well in advance
Yeah,
of
it's
these?
like May 6th, and they reached out maybe like 2-3 weeks ago already.
And they've reached out to us before, so we haven't had any like special permitting, so. And I would say, to kind of base on the conversation, I think it's spot on. Like, part of this is a little bit of an insurance policy. Like, we don't have a lot now. But I think the worst way to like build something is right after you had like doesn't the city have any type of permitting process? And so like, part of this is kind of, break, when there's an emergency, it's like, oh yeah, we have this permitting process. If you're gonna have 200 people in Riverside Park, we're gonna need more than just one porta potty, and have you thought about traffic coming in and out of there, and, what event are you actually doing?
And remember, it floods down there, so we
Right.
can only guarantee it with 50% accuracy.
So, because, there isn't anything right now. If 200 people wanted to gather in Riverside Park and have like a concert, they could do that, and from a staff perspective, this kind of gives us a placeholder to say, have you done your planning so that we can prepare with you instead of like getting the call saying,
What's going on down
what's
here?
going on down there?
No, and I mean, I don't think we need to debate 45 anymore. I think we're all,
Yeah, okay.
that works.
Okay, my only other question was for, it's page 3, the very top, the insurance requirement. Are those numbers standard?
Yes.
It's on my list too.
Okay.
Yes, so those numbers are the city's tort liability limits.
That's what I thought.
So what we're doing is we're effectively requiring them to insure themselves and list the city as an additional insured up to the amount that we are protected by under state law.
Okay, and we do that for like the fireworks for Steamboat Days?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, we do it for a lot of things, and the point here is really to protect the city because these events are happening on city property, right? What we don't want to have happen is for there to be an injury and the city to get sued. It would be very nice if that happens, we can say, well, your insurance is going to cover us and we don't even have to get involved
Okay.
because you are listing us as an additional insured. So that is standard. I did put some language in here about discretion by staff to be exempt from that. For example, if there's not going to be food or alcohol at an event, if it's held totally during the day, when maybe it's on the smaller end of the large events, if you will, when we don't feel like makes sense to require that event or that organization to buy an insurance policy. Because there are sometimes reasons why we wouldn't want to require somebody to do that, because it can be cost prohibitive maybe for their event, and they just don't want to have to go out and do that. So we left a little bit of leeway in there for staff to make a judgment call, just like we do on contracts we enter into with third parties. We kind of make those calls as staff. So,
Okay.
Yep.
And my question on that one was then the 1.5 million. I feel like the standard ones that I see are generally $1 million on every, like just $1 million across the board, for event holdings for insurance. So I'm just curious why we have.
The 1.5 is in the aggregate, so if there's multiple things from one event, multiple injuries, the city has a $1.5 million tort liability cap for those. So it's either, I think the way we have it is $1 million, for any injury to one person, but 1.5 in the aggregate, which again is standard. And insurance companies will only do them in $1 million increments. So if you're a company, or if you're an event, if you want to hold an event, you would have to get a $2 million policy, because insurance companies aren't going to give you $1.5 million. Most of them don't, from what I see. I look at a lot of certificates of insurance, and very rarely do they have $1.5 million limits. They always have either 1 or 2 or 3, etc.
Okay. Then why do we say 15 in here, or 1.5?
Because that's the tort liability. There are very few insurance companies that will offer those. So if they actually find a company that will give them 1.5 for less than they'll give them 2 for, we don't have an issue with that. But that's the tort liability cap is $1.5 million. So I think that's important to keep that number in there for just risk mitigation for the city.
Okay.
That was it for my comments. Anybody have anything else?
Yeah, I have a couple.
Go ahead.
Just to make sure. Okay, so this is page 3 under E, which is the permit denial and revocation. Let's see which one I had here. Number 2. Would substantially interfere with traffic, would interfere with access, would unreasonably interfere with access to businesses or residents in the immediate vicinity of the event. So this one made me think, the Lions, I mean, we didn't obviously call the Lions out directly in here, because it could be the chamber, it could be something like that comes later, but a lot of these events block businesses for a certain amount of time, and you can't park in front of it. So this one is a little bit hard for me. So when I think of the Lions, like trunk or treat is blocked off from here, from 4th to 3rd, and part of 3rd. So to say that, to have in here that we're not going to unreasonably interfere with access to businesses or residences in the immediate vicinity, we're already doing that. We already do that for a number of events. Motorcycle rally will, trunk or treat will. So I think we need some better wording, or we need to take that out, because especially with this being the main drag in the district down here, this is where a lot of events happen at one end or the other. And they're going to be blocking businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's intentionally open-ended. I mean, we have to leave it a little bit open-ended for staff to utilize it as something that we can enforce if we needed to, and if it's not unreasonable. I mean, who gets to decide if it's unreasonable or not? It's staff. And what is unreasonable? Well, if you decide something is an unreasonable interference with access to a business or homes, there's that catch-all at the end that says, and there are not sufficient resources to mitigate those. So, we'll divert people, or we'll reach out to businesses. I mean, I'm open to, if the council doesn't like that language, to take that out. But that's really meant to say, if they want to close down 4 blocks of city streets and there's going to be absolutely no way to get to a business that's open during that event, or somebody can't get to their house, or a neighborhood of people can't get to their homes, we would want to tell them, no, you can't operate. But
hold on one second. Joy, you were going to say it. I thought you were going to say something.
I'm fine with the way this is worded, because unreasonably is subjective, right? And I mean, I think the example that you cited has a specific time. It starts here, it ends here. The rest of the day is still available, right? So, I mean, it's not taking 24 hours of blocking a business timeline on it, and then it's over and everything's open, right? So
Except for Steamboat Days. it's totally
But you can
different.
also like, you can still walk
Yes.
into Peekaboo Baby. It's not like
Right.
there is a hot coal walking area right in front of her
Lot.
front door to her business and you physically can't get there,
Yeah.
right?
Fine, I won't do that this
Okay,
year.
Using the
I've been
truck
burned
or,
by that before.
using the trunk or treat example, like if the Lions wanted to have it in front of Casey's to Depot Park, I would say staff wouldn't support that. We'd say, we'd rather have you in front of Broadway, but if you go right in front of Casey's, that creates a pretty significant detour for the community.
Okay.
And if you're on Broadway, you can take Fourth to Jorgensen or Fourth to Oak. And
Lots of
so-
options.
Lots of options, and so that, I think, provides us the flexibility to say, like, your event doesn't work here, but it could work in this other spot.
Okay.
But I'm glad you're thinking through all of the events, because I was trying to do the same thing as I was reading through here, yeah.
Let's see, the other one I had number 3, now what was it? Which requires the diversion of so many law enforcement areas. Areas of the community. Okay, so we obviously have, again, we've got a lot of unreasonablys in here, right? So I guess we're getting more gray as we start talking about it, where it didn't seem so gray when I was reading it before. But when we're talking about law enforcement, and it's going to unreasonably deny law enforcement protection to the remainder of the community, tell me more about that line, because I just, it doesn't, it's not getting anywhere with me. Like, we don't want, I mean, we have Steamboat Days, for just example, we contract for law enforcement. So what's a scenario where it would take law enforcement away that we even need to talk about this?
I think and I don't wanna jump in, but if Brent has something to add too, but if it's such a big event that you're gonna need so many police officers there, and we talk to the sheriff's office, and we tell them about the event, and they say, we do not have enough staff, we don't have enough deputies to patrol that event, so they're gonna either not be able to operate, or they're gonna have to go hire their own security. I mean, the point is we wanna make sure that we have law enforcement patrolling the entire city and or county, and we're not using all those resources for one event that we don't necessarily even, it's not a city event, it's a private event that they wanna hold with our resources, right?
Okay.
So if you, and I'm just using the example of another community I've been in, like Winstock, they have this facility for festival grounds, and it's one thing to have it like 1 year, but if, at one point they were having like a Christian music festival, and then they had like a rock, and then they had a craft beer tasting, and at some point, like our sheriff's office isn't going to be able to provide the protection where I think we get some grace because the city is contracting for Steamboat Days and it's the one community festival. But if we had, Riverside Park became the place for, some type of, concert or activity, and it was, once a month, and they just didn't have the personnel to staff it, that would be grounds to say we can't provide, law enforcement to this in a reasonable way.
And maybe I missed it in here, but do we have something that says that we may require you to get private security? I think we have that.
We can tie conditions to any of these, so
Okay.
that would be inherent with that provision. I
It
think
might need to be noted though, because if we just have police services in here, I mean, people certainly, if they're gonna have a concert at Riverside, can contract for a security company to come in and do that. I think I would feel comfortable having something in there that we could require additional security, you know what I mean, that is not, it just says law enforcement here.
Yeah, we can do that. The conditions section is just that small paragraph at the end of page 2, where it talks about the city may impose reasonable conditions to protect the safety of persons and those sorts of things. And, it's hard to anticipate every kind of condition, but we can say, for example, but not limited to the following, and put those in there. Then it's very clear that that might be asked of you if you want to hold it.
Okay, I would like
Yeah.
that to be in there.
Okay with that, yeah.
Okay, that's all I have then.
Alright, my only question is, so I was kind of thinking about the timeline, right? So if we require people to apply 45 days in advance, and 20 days before the event, we want to give them a deposit. I'm assuming within that time period there, that Delta, we're providing a quote to them for special services.
We would
Because we're
have
gonna-
to in order to know
Right.
what they would owe, yes.
Right, exactly, right, so we're gonna be able to provide them a quote so that, you know, when the actual final accounting comes, right, we've got they know in advance what it's gonna require, so that the
Right.
deposit calculation makes sense and everything like that. Okay, I just wanted to clarify,
Yeah.
because it wasn't specific.
And speaking
Just
of
wanted
that,
to-
like, where are we gonna see fee, like, what's getting calculated into all these fees?
Well, I think that's part of what, don't you have something in here about
Yeah,
fees, and that's another
we,
whole
we
piece of
were,
it?
we were waiting to kind of get
Yeah.
initial thoughts
And
before
then-
we put our heads together and maybe came up with some recommendations on fees, because I think it's gonna be potentially hourly fees, for example, for
Yeah.
a deputy. That would be something we could have a set fee for.
Right.
For, you know, EMTs, it would be the same sort of thing. Street closures and signs, I mean, it all depends on the public resources that go into it, so we were waiting to make sure you were interested in this first of all before we kind of.
Just wanna be a little bit careful, cause some of these are fundraisers too, and we don't wanna price them out when it's money that goes, you know, I mean, we wanna be fair to the city, but we also, I think, I wanna just be a little cognizant when we're looking at fees that
I
we're
don't
not.
think we're looking to make money on this, but I don't think it needs to fundraiser or not. I don't think it needs, the price doesn't need to be borne by taxpayers.
I agree, I think, but I think we need to just make sure we're being very reasonable in it.
Yeah, and, yeah.
We
I
have
don't think
a-
we're gonna-
We have an obligation to charge what it costs and not have like a 20% profit or whatever fee, so when we would we would create some type of methodology that you can review and
perfect.
then say this is what it costs.
Perfect. That was it for me.
Erica?
Dave, can I ask one question? I know I've looked at this a few times and just in our conversations here tonight. I just wanted to clarify under large event, some things that we've been seeing in recent years has to do with like say community park where somebody's renting a park shelter and they have a graduation party and we ask the number of people and if they say we're having 150 people or 175 people, they would then fall under, they'd have to get a permit.
That's exempt in here.
It's
Oh, that's
exempt, yep.
exemption,
It's
okay.
listed.
Yeah, so that's one of the city, we have a system for that already.
Oh, the
We
park
already
shelter,
have to go
okay.
through the park shelter rental policy and they
Okay.
sign all
Yeah.
those agreements. and
Okay, got it.
That would be exempted.
Page one, that letter B on the right.
I'm sure I've read that a few times, it's just when that was jumped out when we were discussing it tonight, I wanted to make sure. Because we're already getting those for this year.
I'm sure.
Thank you.
I don't have anything else. We must have some schedule of professional services like cleanup for events like this, right? Hourly rates.
No,
We don't?
We will shortly.
We will
Okay.
certainly. I mean, we have some stuff in a fee schedule for like the rental downstairs and things like
yeah,
that,
I
but
would say though, like, you know, we don't have an identified cost for the time and resources that it would take to bring, you know, 12 road closure barriers downtown.
Or a street sweeper out or whatever it is.
That for, we contract for, I don't know
Okay.
if the city wants to get in the business of that unless you wanna add it on, but.
Well, it depends on what the event is,
Yeah.
but, you know, if it requires that we do street sweeping through it, or if we require them to do it, but, you know, kind of to the larger point, it's like, well, identifying that cost, because it does take, you know, then we are dedicating personnel to do that, and if it takes them an hour to load and unload and et cetera, but we don't have it, which is part of the kind of the reason for the
Got it.
conversation.
We're gonna run out of time here. We don't.
Well,
Get the peddlers.
no, we've already essentially run out of time.
yeah.
So if you have more questions, don't
I
feel
don't.
squeezed by time, because I'm not feeling squeezed. Okay, do you have what you need from us? I think it's,
I do, what we'll probably do is also talk about fees too, because we want to bring it all to the council in one kind of package, so. I don't know if it's another work session, probably,
I
yeah.
think we make the edits that the council is interested in, and then have Vicky kind of coordinate methodology and reach out with the rest of the team on what services and what the associated costs are for those services. And then bring that to a work session when it's ready.
sounds good. All right. Let's see, I do think that we should put peddlers, solicitors, and food trucks to the regular meeting.
Okay.
Are you guys okay with that?
Mhm.
I don't think
Yeah.
we'll get that done in 6 minutes, 5 minutes. City managers report?
I just have one item that Chad in the public services team are soliciting quotes for spring cleanup, so we should have those by the end of March. So,
People are asking.
yeah,
The date.
so that'll be, they give not only a price, but a day or days that they can do it. He's also working with the Midwakaton on spring cleanup for compost or yard, not compost, but it'd be yard waste for the spring as well. So.
Like where residents can go drop off.
Yeah, we're thinking like maybe probably Carver Station, and whether it's like a dumpster for said waste. But he's coordinating that, so we'll have more details.
Yeah, that was something that we have in the budget for this year, to do a spring and then a fall yard waste cleanup, so. See how that goes and if it's popular or not. Council requests.
I have one thing.
Go ahead.
Well, I guess it's two, but together. So I was wanted an ETA on the stop sign by the Getaway. We had talked at the last meeting about putting the two-way stop or three-way stop, whatever, on it.
Sure.
When that was gonna happen. And was the stop sign going to get moved right away? We talked about moving the stop sign. I'm trying to remember from the conversation. By the gateway.
Getaway.
Yeah.
Getaway. What are you thinking?
That one, my recollection in talking, and I have to confirm, but we are going to consider pouring another concrete square next to Getaway so that there was, I think you have to have like 36 inches of clearance, and if we move the stop sign from where it's at in the grass to the curb line, it gets a little tight for access. So, but we can certainly get that three-way stop thing fast-tracked, those little signs you're looking for. I do think I don't know if it's up, but I know one of the stop signs got clipped coming out of that. It isn't back up, so I would think that the three-way stop things are kind of a standard sign that we can order. I just don't know where we're at with that.
Can we go, I think instead of saying three-way stop, I think like, I'm envisioning something on that stop sign by the Getaway, but I think it should say something more like traffic from the left doesn't stop. Because three-way stop, then you gotta guess which are the three ways, right? And I would guess that it's the traffic sides, not the parking lot side.
I would be fine if the one by the Getaway said, I mean, it could say three-way stop and then that left traffic or whatever traffic does not stop. But I think the other ones can still say three-way so that we still know.
I'm fine with that. I
I
don't think we
agree,
should.
yeah, that's confusing. Could be.
But that's fine, if we want left, whatever, I don't care, as long as something gets on there to note it. But I think the other one should say three-way. And I don't know what there might be a standard of what they can put on there.
Can we can start with the three-way. Can we connect with either Aaron or Dan on any additional signage? I think Aaron should be at our next meeting here, so we can ask him.
Yeah.
And then there was one other traffic, stop sign issue that was brought to me. Somebody who lives on Red Oak Drive, I think if I have the right, or Spring Creek, we got Spring Creek and Red Oak, and that they were also asking, because they were talking about stop signs and the traffic coming in, and people not realizing they're supposed to stop and trying to get through, if we could also add just those little, whatever, if it's two-way, three-way up there, right now it must be three-way, because you come in off of,
It's two-way.
it's two-way. Maybe put just two-way stop on there, because I've had a couple of complaints about traffic not stopping there and people almost getting clipped because it's a short cut in.
Yeah, I mean, it's just I would say that's maybe a broader policy thing for the
Yeah.
council, because nearly every one of your intersections is two-way, and so you might want to think about under what conditions you apply that when it's outside of the business district.
That's fine if we want to, but I need to address it because it was brought to me, so however we want to
That makes
do
me
it.
nervous, then, I just see stop signs with you must please stop. This is a four-way stop. Welcome to Carver, where do we draw the line? Because conceivably, we all know of those stop signs for folks don't.
The other thing that was something that I talked to them, because their other thing is we're asking for a different setup for the stop signs there.
So that intersection was just reviewed and changed within the last year. So if you, I obviously travel that one quite a bit.
Do you, just a little bit?
But
Nobody always stops.
it used to be a stop sign coming in
Okay.
to the neighborhood from Jonathan Carver Parkway,
Mm-hmm.
and it was changed out to have the east-west movement as a through, because if you stop on Spring Creek Drive
you could, there's not enough distance and you could queue up on the Jonathan
Yep.
Carver Parkway, so that's a through, so Red Oak stops and then southbound Spring Creek stops, so it's a normalized intersection that was reviewed during the Jonathan Carver Parkway project, so,
So how long ago did that change?
it would have been, when did Jonathan?
2021, right?
2021, so it's been in place for
Okay.
about a year plus.
Okay, well, I will get this homeowner to give me a little better
Yeah, if you could,
description of what their issue is, and then we can talk about
or I
it.
could, you can give the number, I can have Dan or Aaron call them too, so.
I can do that, sounds
Okay.
good. But we'll worry about the getaway for now.
All right, anything else?
Requests.
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I have a motion by Councilmember McDonald,
A second.
and a second by Councilmember Hirschman. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. All right.